Hi, everybody, and welcome to Metaphysical Insights. My name's William Becker. I'm your host, and I am thrilled today to have the fascinating Mr. Simon Entwistle live from England. And Simon is a collector of ghost stories and legends and myths and history, and putting it all together in a fascinating way often. And um, so we're going to talk about some of this and hear some stories and how things work and all the rest of it. So feel free to ask questions and I can highlight them. Welcome, Simon. I'm thrilled to have you here.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you, William, and good to see you in the flesh, if you know what I mean.
Yes, we met, I think, at a paranormal conference in 2017, if I remember right.
That was some years ago, wasn't it? Was that the city of Nottingham?
I think it was the one. Vivian Powell did it, and it
Oh,
was at the
yes.
Temple Crossing Barns,
Yeah,
the
that's right.
the
Yeah,
Knights Templar Barns, and you open the trap door, and there's a Roman road down there to touch. So
marvellous. Absolutely marvellous,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, that was a great time. Um, well, tell us a little bit more about how you got involved in what you do, and a little bit more about what it is you do, and then I definitely want to hear some stories.
Sure thing. I really got involved in guided ghost walks, mainly because of my passion for ghost stories, but I suppose really from my own father, who would never lie about anything. And his ghostly experience, which to this very day still fascinates me, which is indeed a story, William. Shall I tell that story now to answer your question with a story?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's one of my favourite stories because it's quite emotional, really. And
Mhm.
I call it the 44 million to one against story. We are going to turn the clock back now to 1960 when I was just 5 years old. My parents bought this very, very beautiful house in what we call the English Lake District, a rather beautiful part of North Cumbria, a county in the northwest of England. When I arrived at this new house, it was a beautiful Victorian house, 3 stories. And as the removal van arrived outside the building, I stood there and looked up at this gorgeous building, and I fell in love with it right away. Now, I was 5, my sister was 2, and my brother was just 8 years old. So mum and dad made our beds up very, very quickly, and we all fell into a deep sleep, as children do. Mum and dad carried on working till the early hours of the morning, unloading tea chests of crockery, knives and forks, other items, etc. And around 1 a.m., they thought that they would turn in as well. They made their bed up and they climbed into the bed. The last thing they needed to do really was to put in any curtains because it was a country house. There were no neighbours. My father mentioned that very, very first night he turned over in bed and noticed bright, bright moonlight coming into the room itself. And he turned over and he heard the sound of tiny footsteps. And he thought it's either me, my brother, or sister. The door of the bedroom slowly opened and in came a liver and white cocker spaniel dog. My dad thought, how's that dog got in here? I've locked the door downstairs. He calmly got out of bed and walked towards the dog that was in the corner of the bedroom to grab the dog's collar and take it downstairs. As he approached the dog, he reached the collar, but his hand went straight through the creature. He was quite shocked. He made a second attempt, and his hand went straight for the dog. The dog then turned and looked at the bedroom window as if its name was being called. The dog then disappeared. My father sat on the end of the bed in a state of shock, as you can imagine. My mother woke up with a jolt and she said, oh, I've just had a very strange dream. There's a man outside in Victorian clothing with a dog lead in his hand, pointing up at our bedroom window. My father told her what he'd just experienced, and they put two and two together. Now, I was only 5, my brother under 10, my sister 2 years old. They never told us until I was about 15 years old. In that period of time, of course, I had experienced lots of happy birthdays in that home, lots of magnificent Christmases, and I really grew to love the building, and
Right.
still do. When my dad sold the house in 1973, it broke my heart. As the door closed the last time, and as we left the building, I had a lump in my throat and a tear in my eye, leaving all those happy, happy memories. However, something very, very strange was going to happen. Um, 6 years ago, my wife and I went on what we call a Mediterranean cruise, and a beautiful cruise ship that went into Gibraltar, into Malta, into the Greek islands, etc. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. They had what's called a black tie event on board, where you wore an evening dress and a black dicky bow tie. And I went down to the restaurant with my wife, enjoyed a very good meal, and just 2 tables away was a young lady that kept smiling at me. And I thought, I really cannot be that good looking. As it happened, she knew me. She came from a village not too far from where I live in the northwest of England, a small town called Clitheroe. And she recognised me. Simon, I've been on some of your guided tours. I quite like some of your stories. Have you ever thought about being an entertainer on one of these cruise ships as a PowerPoint presenter by using your laptop and telling stories to an audience? I said, well, would people like ghosts? Would they like murders? Would they like mysteries? She said, you'd be very surprised. I'm going to give you an email address when you get back to England. So I contacted what's called the P&O cruise people, a bit like Cunard, really.
Mhm.
And much to my delight, within 3 days, I had an audition. Now, I could go to the county of Sussex, which is in southern England, some 400 miles away, or up to Cumbria, which is only about an hour's drive from where I live. So naturally, I chose Cumbria for the audition. I was given a telephone number of a lady called Maureen, who was the cruise director. She auditioned all the stars, all the characters that work in these cruise ships. She said, Simon, my house is very hard to find. It's in South Cumbria. So, well, I know South Cumbria quite well. Oh, you won't find my house, she said. She gave me a sat-nav code for my car, and she said, arrive on the Tuesday afternoon, Simon, bring your laptop and, of course, all your stories, which are all up here. And I set off. I found myself driving down the freeway up towards Cumbria, and I went past my old primary school, then past my old secondary modern school, and up a very, very familiar drive through a forest, down the bottom of the forest, and then I turned up a drive and went straight back to the house my father had sold in 1973. I stood there at the age of 58 and looked up at the 3-story beautiful limestone home. Maureen came to the door and she said, Simon, come on, we must get this audition done. We must get the audition done now. You look a bit jaded, she said. Well, Maureen, I know you won't believe this, but I used to live here. No, she said, no. I went into the front room and I had my laptop and I showed her photographs of my childhood, which confirmed my story. She was quite shocked, as you can imagine. Let's have a cup of tea, she said. She made her way into the kitchen and came back with a pot of tea, some milk, some sugar, 2 cups, 2 saucers, and 2 teaspoons. I then told her about my father's experience in 1960 with the liver and white Cocker Spaniel. She dropped the tray. I can still see the teapot spilling across the carpet, sugar and milk, and her eyes widened. She sat next to me on the settee. Simon, that's amazing. My brother lives in London, and every Christmas he'll spend Christmas with us. The very first Christmas he stayed with us, he would have had what would have been your mother and father's room upstairs. He said in the early hours of the morning, the door opened, and in came a liver and white Cocker Spaniel dog. I looked at the ceiling, and as my father, who died way back in 1982, I said, thank you, Dad. That confirms your story of the ghosted dog of that house. It's a truly amazing story, William, but a very true story, of course.
I get goosebumps. You know, it's I don't have words. Takes a lot for me to lose words. Um, you don't. That doesn't happen in real
No,
life.
no.
Not to
The
real
thing is,
people. That's
William,
something.
yeah, I mean, William, I actually love that house so much, and I think about it a lot of the time. I think about it, and to go back there, it's like 44 million to one against. But I always felt as if the house wanted me back again.
Right.
It's incredible, but I swear to you, it is true. And for viewers, if they'd like to, you can go on YouTube and look up Simon Entwistle, 44 million to one against, and you'll actually see the house, and you'll also hear the story again, of course.
Okay. Fantastic. Yes, I want to go and see the pictures of it. And I've been to the Lake District. Not that long after you left it. I was there in '84,
Right,
and
right.
it was it's breathtaking.
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
walking around Lake Grassmere, and
Yes,
um,
yeah.
I was on a tour, but we had oh, I was one of these that didn't sit around all the time. And then the coach driver said, "You've got time. You can walk around the lake if you get to it." So I I did, before it got dark, and I what a wonderful place to grow up.
It's a beautiful place, William. Of course, Beatrix Potter, she came from that part of the world. And you can go to Windermere and have a fantastic museum there called the
Right.
Beatrix Potter Experience. It's always full of Japanese tourists. The Japanese seem to flock there. And one of the reasons, William, apparently, from what the managing director of the museum told me, is that all Japanese children are taught to read with the Beatrix Potter books. And that's why they're fascinated by that story, by Beatrix Potter, of course.
Oh, I sure wish we had those instead of see Dick, see Jane, run, spot, run. You know.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh, this is fantastic. Well, how do you collect all of these? And I want to hear more, but I want to hear a little bit more about your process.
Very good. Well, because of my dad's experience, really, William, that's how I got into, shall I say, ghost stories, because my father wouldn't lie. And of course, the experience I had going back to the house 6 years ago confirmed that the ghost actually existed. That
Right.
that live and white spaniel actually does haunt the building, and it was confirmed. And it just fascinated me, and it still does this very, very day. But I do like eyewitness accounts of unusual experiences, and you can always tell, William, to use an English term, when someone's pulling your leg, when someone's trying to make fun of you. But you can always
We
tell when
use that
someone's
one too.
yeah, you can always tell when someone's being very honest and very truthful. And my next story, again, is a very, very true story of a friend of mine. He's not a close friend, but I do know him very, very well. And he always has a smile on his face, even on a Monday morning when most of us are going to work. He's a happy guy, a very happy guy. And I said, Andrew, you always seem very happy. What is it? Well, I died 3 times. What? You died 3 times? Oh, yes. I'll tell you about it. And if you don't believe me, it doesn't make any difference to me. But I can tell you it's a true story he told me. He was involved in a very, very serious road traffic accident. Now, we're all told about the dangers of alcohol and driving. Well, he and his friend sadly ignored this. They had a very, very good drink in a little village called Gisborne in the West Riding of Yorkshire.
Right.
They decided to drive home, and they took a corner far too fast. The car sped across the road and hit a tree. The engine came off the engine block and crushed Andrew to the back of the seat. His
Mm.
ankles were broken, his legs were broken, his pelvis was broken, and his rib cage was shattered, damaging his heart. When the fire brigade arrived and the ambulance services, they had to cut the roof off the car. He was gently lifted out of the vehicle and placed by the side and pronounced dead. The driver was very, very fortunate because the actual engine came to the side, trapping Andrew and leaving him quite free, really. He only had slight bruising. One inquisitive police officer knelt down near Andrew's body and noticed an eyelid flicker. He's still with us. A helicopter arrived and the helicopter evacuated him to the nearest hospital. On the journey to the hospital, Andrew had what's called a cardiac arrest. The ambulance medical crews used a defibrillator to get his heart going again, and they realized he was in such a dangerous state of health that they needed to go to a specialized hospital in Liverpool. On the journey there, he had a second cardiac arrest. The theatre staff are waiting for him as the helicopter lands in Liverpool. He's rushed at great speed into the theatre. And this is where Andrew's story starts. He said, Simon, you might not believe this, but I swear to you, I've got nothing to gain from this. But what actually happened? I left my body. I found myself looking down at my body in the theatre. I saw doctors and nurses working on my open chest cavity. I saw clamps on either side. And I heard this rather beautiful music. It was almost like Spanish guitars, a beautiful, beautiful music. And I felt I wanted to go towards the music. There was also a very, very bright light. But I felt completely happy. I felt at ease with the world. In fact, I've never felt more comfy and happy in my life. But I looked down and all these people are working on my body. I then felt a need to go back. And Andrew then re-entered his body. But he did remember the staff working on him very, 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 very clearly. And he saw one of the doctors walk over to the sinks by the side of the theatre, and a nurse took his mask off, took his rubber gloves off, and mopped his brow. And he saw a young man with a pencil-thin moustache and slightly dark features. And he heard them talking. Tomorrow we shall be in Ibiza. He remembered those words very, very clearly. For the next 3 months, Andrew is in what we call an induced coma. He's in intensive care. Remember, he's very, very badly injured. Heart problems, nearly every bone in his body broken. His mother and father sat by his bedside for 3 months. And at the end of those 3 months, Andrew's eyes opened. His mother burst into tears at his son coming back again. Word got round the hospital, and the surgeons who had worked on him came rushing upstairs to see him. Well done, Andrew. Well done. You're back with us. We thought we'd lost you that day when you first arrived. And Andrew looked up and saw a young man with a pencil-thin moustache and slightly dark features. Oh, doctor, thank you. Oh, by the way, how was Ibiza? And you've been unconscious for 3 months since you hit the tree and on the A59. You've been unconscious. How do you know that? Oh, I saw the whole operation. And I saw you talking to someone about going to Ibiza. Well, the nurse in question was my wife. And yes, we did go to Ibiza on a holiday the following morning. Andrew had no need to lie about that. He's the sort of bloke that wouldn't need to. He wouldn't gain from it. But I believe every word he said by just looking into the lad's eyes. It wasn't a figment of imagination. And the fact that he saw the same doctor 3 months later come into his room and he instantly recognized him, which is amazing, William, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It really is. And I've heard those kinds of stories from people, and the people on the other side telling them to come back. It's not their time, or I mean, just so many things. It's fascinating,
Yeah,
and
yes.
I like to learn more about how that whole process works with transition from one side back, and um, just the timing. I guess
Yeah.
it really is true that it's we have our own time.
Yeah. But what is amazing, though, William, from talking to Andrew, he always has this huge smile on his face. And yes, he did die 3 times. He was confirmed
Yes.
dead, but it wasn't his time. But he also said, I did see him quite recently, he said, Simon, I'm not bothered about dying. Nothing to worry about, nothing to fear. And I believe that's quite true.
Hmm. Oh, now stories like that give people hope,
Yeah, yeah, I
and
reckon so.
they're true. Um, you're just kind of a natural collector. People around you have all these things happen.
Yeah, I believe you could go to anywhere in the world. You could probably find the most boring town in the world, but it'd be full of characters, full of stories. And there's nothing I like more, William, than bringing those stories to life. Really,
Hmm.
it's a fascinating. And I do get invited to schools actually, and sometimes they are primary schools of children as young as 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm always very diplomatic with the ghoulish stuff, if you will. But I think
Right.
every child does enjoy, shall we say, a happy ghost story, which I tend to use in some occasions. But of course, some are not so happy, really.
Right. Right. Well, you've given. I mean, the one with your father is a very happy story. I
Yeah,
mean, it would be
yeah,
scary. Um, and the one with Andrew, I can see where a child might be a little freaked out by that one, but I think
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
beautiful story. Um, do you have some that are a little beyond what you would be telling to children that age?
Yeah, sure. There are some pretty gory ghost stories, actually, but I love stories from different centuries, really. I mean, I live in this beautiful town called Clitheroe in the northwest of England, and we have a fabulous old coaching inn called the Swan and Royal Hotel. And for this next story, William, we're going to turn the clock back to 1878. At that period of time, here in the county of Lancashire, we had lots of textile factories, and all the textile workers went on strike. And this did cause a lot of grief. Now, in the towns such as Manchester, Liverpool, Blackburn, Burnley, Accrington, these factories were making quality cloth for the world's markets. But they needed one young lad in particular. He was called Jonty Martindale. And Jonty would go to the city of Liverpool and watch the ships come in from Louisiana and Mississippi and
Hmm.
Egypt, full of good quality cotton. His job was then to buy the cotton and sell the cotton to what we call the textile barons, the men who actually owned the textile factories. In 1878, his coach arrived in the beautiful little town of Clitheroe and made its way into the courtyard of the Swan and Royal Hotel. Inside the coach, it was bitterly cold, freezing. Jonty rushed inside and felt the rays of heat from the fireplace. He then saw the landlord, a chap called John Briscoe, who said, "Hey, Jonty, you look a bit jaded. Are you okay, lad? Well, I'm just a bit worried about my wife. She's expecting our first child, and I told her when she gives birth, I'll be by her side." "Oh, don't worry, Jonty. The textile barons are upstairs in the dining room. They're having a big meal right now. They'll be downstairs soon. They'll fill your order book in, and you'll be on your way. By the way, your coach has gone around the back of the building. Your horses are being fed and watered as we speak." Jonty had a nice meal. He had a drink. He then went up to the dining room with his clipboard and took the orders from all the textile barons by saying things like, "I've got 1,000 bales from Louisiana here, some really good Mississippi cotton here, and some very good Egypt as well." He took the orders. He then rushed downstairs. "Where's my coach? I've got to get home. My wife could go into labour at any minute." He paced up and down the windows, uh, looked out of the windows, and in the courtyard, in the dusk of evening, he saw 6 horses and a coach. "Ah, that's my coach." He left at great speed and climbed inside the coach. Inside, it smelt damp. It smelt very, very musty. As his eyes became accustomed to the light, he suddenly realized that in there with him were 2 other people that gave the impression of being female. One lady sat next to him, her head bowed down, her face disguised by a Victorian bonnet. Right in front of him, another lady, her head also bowed down, with another Victorian bonnet disguising her face. On her lap, she had a baby wrapped in a blanket. Jonty tried to get a conversation going. Excuse me, ladies, it's not very nice in here, really. Can you open the window, please? It's not very nice. No answer. He could have been talking to two statues. Even the baby seemed to be motionless. The coach jutted forward. It made its way into the town centre. And Jonty made a second request. Would you mind if I opened the window, please? No answer. He stood up and reached for the leather strap that was attached to the window frame to pull the window down, let some fresh air into the coach, when he heard a scream that went straight through him. He turned to the right. The lady sitting next to him had slowly raised her head, and where there should have been a face was a hollow, dark cavity. Jonty screamed, fell out of the coach, banged his head, and was knocked unconscious. He came round some 5-10 minutes later in a swirling blizzard. He walked back through the town centre and straight back to the Swan and Royal Hotel, where his journey had just started from. He made his way up the steps, and there was John Briscoe, the landlord. Jonty, let me dress that head wound. Where have you been? Well, I got in a coach. This woman, she had no face. This woman, she had a baby. Jonty, calm down. Calm down. Your coach is still around the back of the building. Your horses are still being fed and watered. And if you look outside, the snow is so deep and so thick that any coach that arrived here would have definitely left an imprint. You've been seeing things. Jonty spent the night in the hotel. The following morning, his coach was ready. He got back to his home in Bolton, Greater Manchester, just in time to witness the birth of his baby daughter. However, he did some research into the Lancaster-Manchester coach, which did leave the Swanhill Hotel way back in 1871. It never got to its destination. It made its way towards the city of Preston. To get to Preston, it had to go over what's called Jeffrey Hill, a rather large hill with a chasm either side. A gust of wind caught the Lancaster-Manchester. It blew it down the ravine, killing 6 horses, a driver, an elderly lady, and a young woman and her baby. It seems that was the coach that Jonty got into that night. Wow. Rather true story, but also very, very riveting story, William.
Yes. It's getting into the actual coach that doesn't really exist is not something you usually hear. You hear people see them, not climb in and take off on a ride.
Very damp inside.
I wonder what would have happened if he would have stayed. That coach goes over the cliff every time.
Good question. It's a very spooky place, that, really. I have been there, and I should imagine in the Victorian period, coaches would be quite susceptible to having no brakes and also no suspension. And a gust of wind would have probably affected a lot more than a modern car, really. But it is a very, very spooky place to visit. It really, really is.
Yeah. Those are such a big sail, basically. And I love it. Now, do you get a chance to connect and see stories that are connected to each other, where there's one from here, one from here, one from here?
Yes. Yeah. What I've done over the years, I conduct 12 different guided ghost walks in 12 different locations. And what it has given me, William, is a huge amount of information, lots of stories. And I do occasionally get asked to go to after dinner speeches. And of course, the one thing I don't lose, William, is lack of material. I can go for hours. In fact, if my wife's there, she always goes things like cut, because I go on too long sometimes. But one story which will intrigue your viewers, it really will, William. It's a beautiful story of a man that I did meet some years ago, and he was called Harry Martindale, no relation to our last gentleman, Harry Martindale. He came from the city of York, which is a very, very beautiful city in the county of Yorkshire.
Mhm.
2,000 years ago, there was a very large garrison there of Roman troops. Roman Britain, of course, very, very famous. Now, behind York Minster, which is this equally beautiful Gothic cathedral, is a building called the Treasurer's House. In the Treasurer's House, you have a cellar. Now, Harry Martindale, way back on the 21st of October, 1953, is working in the cellar. He is, indeed, a plumber. In one hand, he has a blowtorch. In the other hand, he has copper piping. He's heating the copper piping up to bend it to install central heating. Now, you imagine working in a cellar. You have a brick wall here, a brick wall there, and a roof over your head. He's got a ladder. He's in the corner of the cellar, and he's working away, bending the copper piping, when he hears the sound of a trumpet that gets louder and louder. He glances to the right, and out of the brick wall appears a white horse with a Roman soldier on it that gallops past him and straight into the wall opposite. He then watches in amazement as platoon after platoon of Roman infantry come walking through the wall to follow the horse. Harry scuttles down the ladder and cowers in fear in the corner of the cellar, but he suddenly realizes these Roman soldiers can't see him. He also notices they all look to be very, very thin, very emaciated, but slightly dark-skinned. He also notices he can only see them to their knees. As the last Roman soldier goes past, the sound of the trumpet fades into the wall as well. Harry swallows. He rushes upstairs and tells his boss. His boss is not amused at all. No, 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 Harry, get back down there. We've got to get this job finished. We're under a contract. We're behind as it is. Get back down there. I can't. Harry, you're sacked. The poor lad felt deflated. He walked for the city of York down this beautiful, beautiful street called Stonegate and into the oldest public house in the city of York called the Old Star Inn. He made his way to the bar and ordered a stiff drink, as you can imagine. But at the bar was a young lad from the York Evening Press. His words were, "Hey, mate, you look like you've seen a ghost." Actually, I've seen about 85 this afternoon. Oh, yeah? Tell me about it. It's getting towards Halloween. Might make a good story. Harry told the journalist about his experience in the cellar. It was printed 2 days before Halloween. The city of York laughed at Harry. He was the butt of many a joke. However, 2 weeks later, some more soil had to be taken from the cellar to install the central heating pipes underground. At the area where Harry had seen his Roman soldiers, they found a Roman road, and they found a stone tablet with beautiful carvings in the tablet with the words Eberacum, the garrison of York. They'd found the very, very entrance to the garrison. Now, this is when the professors from York University sat down with Harry and had a good conversation with him. He described the soldiers he saw to be slightly dark-skinned, very emaciated, very, very thin, but carrying a spear, a round shield, and what looked like a leather kilt. Not at all like a Hollywood Roman soldier, if you will.
Right.
And that when the professors said, Harry, it looks like what you've seen is a time warp into another era, another time, but we think what you have seen is the 9th Hispanic Legion leaving the city of York for the city of Carlisle on the Scottish border, and they were wiped out by the Celts and the Scots. It was the only time a Roman division has been defeated by anyone. And you somehow, with your blowtorch and your copper piping, have indeed unearthed another world, another time, in another place. Quite a beautiful story, that one, William.
It is. It really is. And I can picture the area. I've been to York, and the gate. Okay, the Treasury building's here, the cathedral's here. There's a
Yes.
street here that goes out the gate. I stayed in an old pub right here at the wall. And you go out the gate, and to the left, there's a coffee shop that has plexiglass in part of the floor that you look down into the
Oh,
Roman
yes.
guard room.
The Roman baths. The Roman baths. That's right.
Uh huh.
That, that's a
And then you
gorgeous.
go across and down, and there are the big museums and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's magical. Um, I didn't go into the treasury. I have to go back and go into it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Something similar happened in my part of the world, actually, William. It would be about 15 years ago. There is a bit of history of this story, but there's very much a ghostly piece as well, really.
Hmm.
If we turn the clock back to 1642, here in the United Kingdom, we had a huge problem with the royal family, King Charles I, and what we call Parliament. Now, Parliament felt it was only right that the people of this country should vote democratically for their own government. Now, the king thought, I run this country, not you. So wars declared in October 1642. And quite simply, those people who used to fight for the king were called royalists, and those for parliament, parliamentarians. The English Civil War started. Now,
Hmm.
on the Fylde coast, which is the coast of Lancashire, you'll come across a very, very beautiful building called Horton Towers. And Gilbert de Horton was a very, very wealthy landowner, and he formed a huge army of soldiers, all loyal to King Charles I. In fact, he wrote to the king and said, Sir, I shall take all of the Lancashire towns, sir, by New Year's Day, sir. He formed a very large army. He equipped them, he trained them, and they had cannon, cavalry, and muskets. And they set off to take the town of Blackburn. In the town of Blackburn, they were rather fortunate to have two very good generals who were very, very loyal to Parliament, General Starkey and General Shuttleworth. And they dug a series of trenches around the town of Blackburn, waiting for this attack that was going to take place on the 24th of December, 1642, Christmas Eve. Now, Horton got his cannon on this hill called Duke's Brow and opened fire on the town of Blackburn. Cannonball after cannonball came raining in. Shrapnel was going everywhere. Now, Starkey and Shuttleworth told their men, right, boys, keep your heads down beneath the parapet. We can expect an infantry attack at any minute. But nothing happened. What did happen? On top of Duke's Brow, there's a huge argument with Horton and his men. Sir, we don't mind dying for you, sir. We don't mind dying for the king, sir. But it's Christmas Eve, sir. We should be with our wives and children. Horton was livid. I paid you. I've equipped you. Attack Blackburn now. They refused. They about turned and started the march back to their homes. In the meantime, Starkey and Shuttleworth thought, hey, they're retreating. And they caught the rear guard on top of Duke's Brow. There were over 3,000 casualties on both sides, and the battlefield was littered with the dead. We're now going to go to 1995, and on Duke's Brow this very day is a lovely lady called Jeannie Halliwell. And Jeannie had 7 children who all left home, and she was left with this very large house. And she didn't want to sell it, so she opened what we call a guest house. She and her husband David run it to this very, very day. Now, in 1995, we had a rather good summer here in Lancashire, which is quite unique, really. Hot sunshine. And Jeannie made her way to her vegetable plot and started to dig. She put the fork into the soil and turned the soil over. Up came a cannonball, some splinters, some musket balls, and a broken spur, which was obviously from the Battle of Duke's Brow. She put the items into a seed tray and she took them into the house and placed them on her kitchen sink to wash them when the telephone rang, as it did on many occasions. On the end of the phone was a gentleman from Australia. Hello there. Have you got a room for my wife and 3 kids? We're going to come over the Savo. Yes, of course I have, said Jeannie. She put the phone down, and in the afternoon, the Australian family arrived, a mum, dad, 3 daughters. And Jeannie said, oh, just go to the front room, and I'll make you a nice cup of tea, and then I shall take you to your rooms. She put the kettle on, and then she heard hysterical shouting and screaming. The Australian family came rushing down the corridor, elbowed her out of the way, and into their car, and reversed at great speed down the driveway, leaving poor Jeannie in a state of shock. She thought, oh, that's terrible. Oh, no. Has my dog made a mess in that front room? Has my cat made a mess in the front room? She made her way into the front room and saw the settee at its side, the sofa on its side, a picture hanging awkwardly, and a lampshade on the floor. She told her husband. Husband said, oh, don't worry, Jeannie, don't worry. Australians, very strange people. She was very upset. That night, she got a telephone call from, of all places, William, Grasmere in the Lake District, from the same Australian. Hello there. So sorry about leaving your house in such a hurry. I should think so. What was the problem? Oh, my wife's just got over it. What do you mean your wife's just got over it? Well, in the front room there, these soldiers came for the wall right for my wife and 3 kids. Soldiers? Oh, yeah. Soldiers, red coats, gouty beards, right for my wife and 3 kids. My wife just got over it. Well, thanks for telling me, she said. She put the phone down. It wasn't long before the local newspaper called the Lancashire Evening Telegraph got hold of the story. Then the national newspaper here in the United Kingdom called the Daily Mail got the story, and they did a feature. It wasn't long before York University got in contact with her, and they sat down with her, and they said, Jeannie, you were the first person to touch the cannonball since 1642, the first person to touch that spur since 1642, and also the shrapnel and musket balls. You've opened a time warp to another era and another place, like Mr. Harry Martindale did in York in 1952. A lovely story, William. Lovely story.
It is. And do you think that's what these are? Is a time warp where these are coming through?
It's really hard to say, William. As I say, I'm a collector of stories. I'm not a psychic. I'm not a medium. I have none of those powers whatsoever. I do know some very good mediums, but I don't have any of those feelings whatsoever, really. The nearest thing that happened to me, William, if I could use another story, is that okay?
Oh, please.
It did intrigue me again. It's quite an emotional story, but also, again, a very, very true story. Way back in 2005, I was watching the television with my wife when the telephone rang. It was one of those telephone calls that no one really wants. I could tell from my wife's expression she was rather upset about something. I turned the television down. So what's happening? She said, Simon, it's your brother. Yeah, what's happened? He's died. I was quite shocked, as indeed anyone who's lost a loved one will understand.
Right.
It took me 3 days for that to sink in, William, really. But I knew where the funeral was going to take place. It was going to take place in South Cumbria, where my father's also buried. And I just felt obligated. I felt like I had to go to the little church where the funeral was going to take place 3 days before. I don't know what it was. I just felt I had to go. Now, that little church, it's a gorgeous Saxon church. When I was at primary school, we all went there because I went to a church school which was allied to the primary school. And again, Christmas is there, etc., etc. So the building was no stranger to me whatsoever. But I felt I had to go. It was a Thursday morning in February 2005. I walked into the church and I looked at the familiar roof and the familiar pews, etc. Sat down. There was no one in the church at all. For a few seconds, I looked at the floor and then I heard voices. I looked up and there were 2 very, very elderly ladies that had very pleasant smiles on their faces. And they said, can we help you? I said, well, my brother's died. It's his funeral here in 3 days' time. Oh, they said, oh, we're so sorry. Can we pray for you? I thought, well, yes, of course, ladies.
Mhm.
They sat on either side, one lady this side, one lady that side, and they clasped their hands together and prayed. And I closed my eyes, William, at the same time. I then felt this hand on my forehead. I could feel the curvature of the palm, and I thought, it must be one of these ladies. I opened my eyes, and they had both had their hands clasped tightly together. But I could feel this hand on my forehead, and I recognized the hand as being that of my brother. It was the same hand because it had happened a few times over the years, of course. He had quite small hands, and I could feel the curvature.
Uh-huh.
These two ladies finished their prayers, and I had this feeling of, like, dare I say it, William, euphoria. I felt, he's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's on the other side. He's on the other side. It just confirmed it by the hand on my forehead. I felt quite happy. I got up, walked towards the door, turned. There was no one in the church at all. I got back to my home in Clitheroe and told my wife, and she had a bit of a laugh about it, really, and one or two other people as well. But I did meet one of the local reverends who I know quite well, a chap called Andy Gray. He's a young vicar from the town of Clitheroe, and I just happened to mention this. He said, "I believe your brother's died, son." And I said, "Yes, yeah, yeah." I said, "I went to the local church 3 days before." And these two women came from nowhere. They sat next to me, and they talked, and they just disappeared. Oh, he said, "Oh, no problem. Angels, both of them." And I thought, wow, that would explain why they'd disappeared when I went to the door. And being elderly women, they couldn't have run away. But what was quite striking, William, is their faces. They had really beautiful smiles, like caring smiles, like
Right.
concerned smiles, like, dare I say it, angelic smiles.
This is beautiful. I've never heard a story like that before.
I promise it's quite true, really. But it is true. It really is. But again, it was from that part of the world. And again, it's a family connection. I mean,
Right.
I thought the world of my dad, great guy. And my brother as well, great guy, you know. And
I'm really
it's,
glad that you were able to have that experience because
yeah,
it is
yeah,
so important. And I am a medium, and
yes,
they are usually very, the other side is a beautiful place and a beautiful way to be. And even the most broken people here, once they pass over, get to shed so much of the pain. I mean, they they all really start thriving. Um, and it's given me a lot of hope too,
yeah,
for what's
yeah.
next. And so to have that connection with your brother, I think
Mm.
is beautiful. Like those angels were there for you, not
It, it,
so much
yeah.
for him.
Well, I will never forget the look on their faces. They just came from nowhere, William. They just came from nowhere. And this is a little country church,
Uh-huh.
a long way from a civilization. And it didn't occur to me at the time, but I can still see the sympathy and the kindness on the faces. It was quite unique, really.
Right.
Very, very unique. Yeah.
Oh, geez. These stories I can see where you could go on for hours. I would be willing to sit and listen for hours. Um, Now, are all of your stories pretty much along the same line with this, or do you have some that, um, I don't know, a different genre, a different focus of some kind?
Yeah, when I said I'm a collector of stories, I love the ones which you know are genuine.
Right.
And you can read about ghost stories, William. Of course you can. But I do love the eyewitness ones, really, and the ones that you know are very, very true. Are we okay for time, William? Have we got time to
Yes.
get it?
And we can go over if you want to too. Whatever. We don't have to end at any
Yeah.
point. But yes.
Uh, yeah, I do a lot of work with local authorities, and they have what's called tourism officers that work for local authorities. And I met a
Okay.
lovely lady called Jackie, who's sadly has passed away, but she was a good friend of mine, really. And she said, "Simon, I'd like you to organise some tours of the town of Blackburn." And I, of course, needed stories, and I put an ad in the local paper. I did get a few, shall we say, characters that you knew were pulling your leg, but one wasn't, and he was a lovely guy called Bill Morris. And
Mhm.
Bill's story, again, is quite affectionate because it's true. He said, Simon, I used to live by the railway line as a young boy. My mum and dad, they had a vegetable patch by the railway line with a fence separating the railway track from the garden itself. We used to dig potatoes up, carrots and spinach and cabbage. And I used to sit on the fence and watch the steam engines go by and wave at the steam engine drivers. They, of course, would wave back. I told my mum and dad, when I leave school, I'm going to work on the railway. Bill left school at 14 and got a job at Blackburn railway station as a wheel tapper. His job was to actually tap the wheels and make sure they weren't cracked when the engines arrived at the station.
Right.
Age of 18, he got a job as a fireman on a steam locomotive. And just after his 21st birthday, he got the job of his dreams, steam engine locomotive driver. He
Wow.
would take the engine up to the city of Edinburgh in Scotland, down to the city of London. But when he went past his mum and dad's house, he would pull the whistle and they'd go rushing down to the vegetable patch to wave at him as the train went past. In the summer of 1952, he took the engine down the line, and in between the city of Manchester and the town of Blackburn is a very, very long tunnel called the Stuff Tunnel. On either side of the Stuff Tunnel are beautiful open green fields full of sheep and full of cattle. Bill noticed sitting on the fence a little boy with straw-coloured hair. Of course, as the engine went down the line, the little boy started to wave, and Bill waved back at him because he too had once been a little boy. He knew exactly what was going through this little boy's imagination as the steam engine went down the line. He saw him every day. For the next 5 weeks, the little boy was always sitting on the fence. However, in October that year, he took the engine down the line and noted for the very, very first time the little boy was not sitting on the fence, but standing in the centre of a field near the entrance to the tunnel, but with sheep and cattle all around him. When the boy saw the engine arrive, he started to run towards the fencing, and Bill noted from the footplate the little boy was running through sleeping sheep. In fact, the sheep didn't even know he was there. He elbowed the fireman. Look at that, look at that. Sorry, mate, too busy shoveling, came the reply. The train went into the tunnel, got to the city of Manchester, and they changed the freight over, come back up north, and they made their way to the buffet restaurant on the station for teas and coffees, etc., refreshments. And the farmer said, Hey, Bill, you've been very, very quiet. What's the problem? Well, it really worries me. You know that little boy with the straw-coloured hair who sits on the fence near the tunnel entrance? Oh, yes, yeah. Today he wasn't there. He was in the field. When we came down the line, he started to run towards the fencing. I saw him run through sleeping sheep. The sheep didn't even know he was there. Oh, no. You're seeing things, said the fireman. The train made its way back up north. As they were about to enter the tunnel from the Manchester side, they saw a red light. Bill slowed the engine down and noted the red light was being held aloft by a police sergeant. Bill stopped the locomotive. What's wrong, Sergeant? Oh, terrible. There's been a young lad killed at the end of the tunnel. Oh, Sergeant, that is terrible. Aye, he lost his brother there 5 years ago. Oh, Sergeant, that's heartbreaking. Oh, it is. We've just been to see the parents. It wasn't pleasant. No, it wouldn't be, said Bill. Word filtered through the tunnel. They could take the engine through it. As Bill brought the steam locomotive down the length of the tunnel, it emerged into bright sunshine, and Bill glanced to the left and saw the straw-coloured haired boy holding the hand of a much taller boy. As Bill turned to wave at them, they rose their arms and both faded into thin air. The hair on
Mm.
Bill's neck rose as he saw them disappear into thin air. Elbowed the fireman. Did he see that? Did he see it? No, mate. Too busy shoveling, came the reply. I met Bill over a pint of beer in one of the pubs where he goes to on a regular basis. And you can tell when someone's telling you a true story, when someone's telling you a fib, and that came from his heart.
Uh, I get teary. Um,
A
these are
beautiful
really
story.
incredible. Yeah, I'm any any story you want to talk about. I'm happy to listen, and I'm sure the viewers are too.
Sure
So
thing, sure thing. There's such a great selection out there, really. Uh, we've had
right,
um, we've had a ghostly story. Let's have a rather sad story. Let's have
okay.
a murder, and this is quite an unusual murder, really. Um, but it would make a good Spielberg film. We are
I
going to
like a
turn the
good
clock.
murder.
Yeah. Uh, on my guided tour, we do go to this area in Blackburn, which is the old Wheatsheaf Hotel. But we're going to turn the clock back now to the 25th of October, 1876, and the story of Emily Holland. Emily is 9 years old. She's walking through the town of Blackburn with her two brothers to go back home. As they walk past the Wheatsheaf Hotel, she suddenly disappears. The two brothers turn. Where's she gone to? Where's she? Oh, she must have run up ahead of us. When they got home, Emily was not there. You can imagine her mother and father were very annoyed. What do you mean she just disappeared? You should have stayed with her. She just disappeared. How can anyone disappear? Shouted her mother. The parents rushed down to the town centre and straight to the police station, where they met Inspector Eastwood, Inspector Potts, and Detective Livesey. And they said, "Oh, don't worry, we'll organise some search parties right away." For 7 days, they combed the whole of the town of Blackburn, but couldn't find her. On the eighth day, a gentleman called Mr. Peter Fairclough took his dog for a walk near the river in Blackburn. The dog came out of some reeds on the riverbank with some newspaper in its mouth. And Fairclough said, "Get that out your mouth." He tugged the newspaper, and as he tugged the newspaper, out fell a child's hand. Fairclough was horrified. It wasn't long before Eastwood, Potts, and Livesey arrived, and they ascertained that the hand belonged to 9-year-old Emily Holland. An hour later, a Mrs. White from North Blackburn had been walking to work in the early hours of the morning at a textile factory where she was employed when she tripped over some more newspapers, saturated in blood. She picked up the newspaper and she opened it. To her horror was the torso of a child. Eastwood and Potts arrived immediately. Eastwood was violently sick. They took the remains back to the mortuary, and that's when Detective Livesey and Eastwood and Potts looked inside the newspaper, and they found a lot of human hair belonging to different human beings. "I've got it," said Eastwood. "I've got it. Whoever committed this despicable act of murder on this young woman was a barber. It's a barber we need to find." Now, there were 25 barber shops in the town for that period of time, due to the fact it was a huge textile town, and they checked every single one. One of them was a barber shop run by a gentleman called Mr. William John Fish. John Fish was 25 years old and considered to be quite a respectable man. He had a wife and two daughters. Inside the barber shop was lots of newspaper, the same newspaper that had been used to wrap the poor girl's organs in. Eastwood took his pad out and looked at the numbers that he'd written on the paper that had been used to wrap the poor girl's organs in, and that newspaper was not actually in the shop. "Mr. Fish, where's last week's Lancashire Evening Telegraph?" "Oh, I used it this morning, sir, to light the fire." "Oh, very good." And they accepted his story. Of course, Fish was 25, wife, two daughters, considered to be very respectable. Well, a week passed, and the people of Blackburn were getting very annoyed because there was no arrest. Another week passed, and the billboards very near the police station had horrible words like local police no good, local police not worth the tax we pay them, local police incompetent. This upset Livesey, Potts and Eastwood. And that's when the Home Office in the City of London put up £100 to anyone who could find the murderer. And a local mill owner, a gentleman by the name of William Harwood, put up another £100. £200 in 1875 was the equivalent of probably £100,000 nowadays.
Yeah, I would think.
Who should pick up the gauntlet but a 13-year-old boy from the city of Preston called Peter Levine. Peter had a little dog called Morgan. Morgan was a lurcher collie cross. He wrote to Eastwood, "Sir, I've got a little dog, sir. It's called Morgan. He'll find your murderer." Eastwood, Potts and Livesey had a good laugh at this young boy's letter. Handwriting wasn't very good, spelling mistakes, etc. But they looked out of the window, and the billboard that morning was very, very critical of the detectives. They thought, we tried everything. Let's bring him in. So they met Peter at the railway station with this little dog shivering with the cold called Morgan. And Peter said, "Sir, my dog just needs to get a scent from the newspapers used to wrap this poor girl's body in, and I'll catch him for you." Eastwood, Potts, Livesey had another laugh. They thought, we'd tried everything. They took the young lad and the dog down to the mortuary, and they brought up the remains of poor Emily's torso and severed hand. The dog started to bark hysterically, and Peter shouted, "Sir, he's got a scent, sir." They opened the door. The dog ran straight up the High Street, down King Street, down Mincing Lane, and straight to William Fish's barber's shop, and scratched at the door. Behind the frosty glass was a very frosty-faced William Fish, horrified to see the three detectives and this dog scratching at the door. They banged on the door. He opened the door. The dog went straight through his legs, straight to the front room, and started barking up the chimney. Eastwood shouted, "The dog knows there's someone here. Right, arrest Fish." Potts arrested Fish and handcuffed him and forced him to the floor, whilst Eastwood and Livesey knelt down and reached up into the chimney breast above the lighted fire, and they found more newspaper. They brought the newspaper out and unfolded it, and they found the remains of the dress that poor Emily had been wearing the day she was abducted. Now, in those days, the police were allowed to be a lot more persuasive than they are nowadays, and they gave Fish a very good hiding, which is basically assault. He was then sent to Liverpool and put on trial. Of course, it was blatantly obvious that he'd murdered poor Emily, but he'd been drinking very, very heavily that day. And for some inexplicable reason, probably due to alcohol intake, as young Emily went past the Wheatsheaf Hotel, he grabbed her. He rushed into the stable block, committed a terrible act on this 9-year-old girl. Horrified what he'd done, he throttled her. And as Eastwood and Potts quite rightly ascertained, he then took her back to the barber's shop and dissected her body on the floor, and that would explain why the other human hair was inside the actual newspaper. Well, the reward, £200, a lot of money, but poor Peter would not see a penny. His mother and father spent every single penny before he was 18, eligible to collect the ransom. And there we have the Emily Holland story.
And despicable parents.
Yeah.
What a story.
The poor lad never saw a penny.
Do you have a book out? Have you
Yes, I
thought
do.
about? Okay.
I do have a book, William. It's on Amazon, and
Okay.
it's called Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. Ghostly Tales of the Unexpected. And some of the stories you've just heard are actually in the book. But I do have a YouTube channel, which is called simply Tales from the Graves by Simon Entwistle. You'll find that on YouTube. They're all free. and there's a lot of good stuff in there, including one that I did with a group from the city of Birmingham in a beautiful hall called Salmsbury Hall, which goes down as one of the northwest most haunted buildings. And
Been there.
whilst we're filming upstairs, this door kept slamming and shutting by itself, but only when I mentioned a story relating to the Samlesbury Hall witches. You'll find that on YouTube under TGF, Samlesbury Hall, TGF, and of course TGF Simon Entwistle, Samlesbury Hall. You'll find it, and you'll see the actual paranormal event taking place. It wasn't rigged. Some people think it was, but I can assure you, I don't do that sort of thing.
I know. No, your reputation is fantastic. Whoops. Eric is right. Should do audiobooks as
Yeah.
well.
Well, William, I would love to. I would love to, but I'm not really a technical guy. I do have a lot of stories on what we call zip file, which I can send by email to anyone in the world, really. But I don't
Mhm.
have the technical knowledge to actually create an audio book. I've got all the stories, of course, but I don't know how to actually do the technical side. That's my only problem, William. Yeah.
I think I think you could find a production company or um, a publisher or something that would take care of that end for you.
That would be
I
great, really.
mean,
That would
just
be,
because you're so good.
it's knowing who to contact, really, William. And of course, I presume there'll be quite a substantial fee to organise that, really.
I don't know. There's, what I'm thinking would be the type of thing where, um, well, if you have Simon and Schuster publish your books, you don't pay them to publish them. They
No,
pay
no,
you.
Amazon were
Yeah.
brilliant. They were
Yeah.
brilliant. Amazon were very, very good. And of course, they will print on demand, which is great, really. So there's no wastage, which is great, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would think there should be some kind of a place out there, um, legitimate professional um, audiobook publishers that could do that. There's, I don't know. It's not something I've done. Um, it's
No,
just,
I'd like to have a go. Of course, I would. Yes, I'd love to do
yeah,
that, William. But it's the technical side that's my only obstacle, really.
I understand that part. I'm not very tech savvy these days myself, but um, it's a little after. Oh, we've been going about an hour and 8 minutes, which is great. Do you have time and energy? I know it's late where you are. Would you like to take us out on one more? Or
Yes, that's really kind of you, William. And I've got to say, I was really chuffed when he contacted me because we are friends on Facebook, of course. And
right?
it's I was really chuffed, to use a Lancashire term, really pleased when he contacted me. So, shall I pick one of my favourite ghost stories then, William?
Yes.
Okay. Um, this is a very, very touching story, and we shall go to Samlesbury Hall for this one. First of all, Samlesbury Hall was built in the year 1322. It's a Grade 1 listed building, which means it can't be knocked down. It means it's got to be looked after.
Mhm.
There's a very, very touching story from there, and we are going to turn the clock back now to the early part of the 17th century, and the story of three young ladies, Jane Southworth, Jean and Ellen Brearley. Jean and Ellen are 20 years of age, and so's Jane, and they're having a meal at Samlesbury Hall. They're enjoying a nice meal when all of a sudden the King's Commission arrived and shouted, "In the name of the King, we arrest you for witchcraft!" "My daughter a witch!" shouted Sir Richard. The poor girls are shackled. They're taken to the city of Lancaster, and they're put in a cell next to what we call the Pendle witches, some convicted witches, and they've all been found guilty of witchcraft. They've also been found guilty by one of their own children, a little girl called Jeanette, who's only 6 years old, and she's the head witness, and she's literally pointed them all out as being at a meeting in the Forest of Pendle. And she tells the audience, the jury, about dogs called Tib, Bull, Fancy, and Dandy, which is the devil in disguise that had given them special powers. Of course, the jury believed that a little girl of 6, 7 years old cannot lie or be manipulated, and they're all found guilty. Now, the Samlesbury Hall witches are sent to Lancaster at the same time, but kept in a totally different cell. On the 20th of August, 1612, Jane hears this huge roar outside her cell window at Lancaster City Castle. She climbs up onto the shoulders of her two friends and looks out of the grille. There, to her horror, she sees the Pendle witches, 12 of them, in a long line with their hands tied behind their backs, climbing onto what we call the pillory, which is the gallows. A rope is placed round all their necks, and they're standing on very, very rickety trestles, which are stools, really. This giant of a man, called Thomas Cavell, kicks the stools out from each one of them. As they're kicked out, these poor people, they don't hang, they strangle.
Right.
There's this huge roar, which would have made any football club proud, a huge roar. The two girls look up and see Jane on their shoulders. What's happening, Jane? What's happening? Terrible things are happening, she said. And then there's silence. A while later, they hear footsteps that get louder and louder and louder. A key is placed in their door. The cell door is opened, and there's Mr. Thomas Cavell. Jane Southworth recognises him as the man that has just executed the Pendle witches. He shouts, "Right, you three, we just dealt with that lot. It's your turn next, follow me." The three of them must have been terrified, particularly Jane, because she's just watched the execution from her cell window. They make their way up the twisting staircase and into the same courts that have just dispatched the Pendle witches. They stand in front of James Altham, City of London; Edmund Bromley, City of London; Thomas Potts, City of London; Roger Noel, local magistrate for the Forest of Pendle; William Holden, magistrate for Burnley; and Nicholas Bannister, magistrate for the Barrow Ford area of the Forest of Pendle. The jury are all male, and the prosecution is all male, because in 1612, in the United Kingdom, women are not permitted to have a brain and treated very, very, very badly. They bring in another child witness, a little girl called Gracie Sarberts, and Gracie is the head gardener's daughter from Samlesbury Hall. She is picked up and put on top of the desk so the jury can see her. And James Altham, the senior circuit judge from London, says, "Right, young lady, read out your testimony against these 3 witches." "I will, sir. I was walking along the banks of the River Ribble, sir. I saw Jane Southworth and Jean and Ellen Braley swimming in the river, sir. It was a hot summer's day. I then saw these dogs. I have never seen the breed before, sir. Long backs, cloven hooves, white teeth, red eyes. They jumped into the river, sir. They materialised into human beings, slightly dark-skinned human beings. They picked up all 3 women. They danced in a circle. They paired off for a meal. I then watched from a distance, sir, as fraternisation was taking place with these demonic spectres. On the second day, Ellen Braley came to see me. She said, 'Gracie, would you like to have a bit of fun?' 'Fun? What fun?' 'Well, a little boy has just been born at Samlesbury Hall. He hasn't been christened. So we'd like to drink his blood.' 'No,' said Gracie, 'I don't want to do that.' James Alden picked the gavel. 'We find you guilty. You will die like the rest this morning.' Before the gavel came down, his companion Edmund Bromley, the other circuit judge, said, No. Let her finish her testimony.' Sir, they made their way to Samlesbury Hall in the dead of night, where the little Welshman baby was sleeping, sir. Over 4 nights, they took him from his cot. They pricked his stomach. They drank his blood. He then died, sir, was interred at Samlesbury Church. In the dead of night, sir, they came back. They dug up the coffin. They took the child's corpse from the coffin. They boiled the baby. They ate the baby's flesh, but kept some body fat that would enable them to change shape. That was it. The senior judge, Edmund Bromley, picked the gavel. We find you guilty. Before the gavel came down, Jane pulled off what I can only describe really as a miracle. Sir, I beg of you, sir, to cross-examine this young girl, sir. She's been deliberately manipulated by a Catholic priest. Just that one word, Catholicism, made the judge sit back. You're an Anglican, you say? Yes, sir. I married into the South of family, sir. They never liked me because of my Anglican views, sir. This young girl has been deliberately manipulated by a Catholic priest hiding at Salisbury Hall to falsely incriminate me and my two friends, sir. Please cross-examine her. Just that one word, Catholicism, hushed the whole courtroom. James Altham, Edmund Bromley, Thomas Potts, Roger Noel, William Holden, and Bannister left the court and they took Grace next door. Jean, Ellen, and Helen, they stood there. Would they live? Would they join the Pendle Witches? After what seemed like an eternity, the court was reassembled. James Altham stood up. In the light of new evidence, we find you, Jane Southworth, Eugene and Ellen Brayley, innocent of the crimes against you. You're free to go. The three of them hugged each other. They jumped for joy. They screamed out in happiness. As they left Lancaster City Castle, they turned and looked at the castle itself. They saw the Pendle Witches still hanging and blowing in the wind by their necks. At the end of the pillory, they saw 3 empty nooses, and they realised they'd not only saved their lives, but also they'd escaped with their lives. But the story hasn't really ended there. For many, many centuries, people have argued between the Pendle Witches and the Salisbury Hall Witches. We do know from a book written in 1613 by Thomas Potts called The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire that they were tried the same day by exactly the same prosecution and the same jury. However, in 1921, 2 local doctors met in a public house in the village of Worley, not too far from Salisbury, Dr. Whitaker and Dr. Dawson. They enjoyed a few glasses of claret and had a lovely hot pot meal. They discussed the Pendle Witch story. They discussed the Salisbury Hall Witch story, and that's when Whitaker had a brainwave. I've got it. I believe young Grace was telling the truth. How? Well, the way she's described those dogs in the River Ribble sound rather like the dogs belonging to the Pendle Witches. Tib, Ball, Fancy. They belong to Demdike, Chattox and Redfern, convicted Pendle Witches. Remember, this young girl would not have been in court that day, but she's described them perfectly. But also, let's write to York Minster and get permission to exhume the Walshman grave. They wrote to York, and the Reverend John Franks arrived. They went to Salisbury Church, where he met Whitaker and Dawson. He got the grave records and started walking up and down the cemetery. There, gentlemen. There. That's where you should start digging, there. Whitaker and Dawson started to dig. Just 2 feet beneath the surface, they came into contact with a 17th century child's coffin, with the metal band still across it. Under Church of England supervision, it was opened and found to contain nothing. Who knows? Young Grace may just have been telling the truth. We shall never, ever know. What I can tell you, though, is Thomas Potts's book, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire, is a very, very good read. Thank you, William.
Simon, thank you so very much. This has been a great pleasure, and I would like to have you back on again sometime before too terribly long.
Well, I'd love to visit you in your gorgeous country, William.
I would like that very much, and I have a guest room. It comes complete with ghosts.
I've been to Philadelphia, Boston, and Pittsburgh, but I've never been to your lovely part of the world, which is quite famous, isn't it?
Completely the opposite side of the country from those.
Yeah.
And Um, we're very different, but our history is newer. I mean, we've had Native Americans, but as far as the um, European settlers come, we're quite new. Um, and the culture's a little different and everything else. Spectacular scenery. And the area I live in is full of ghosts and ghost
Yeah,
stories. I've got
yeah,
lots of them myself. And I used to give ghost tours for a friend's company.
yes.
And so, um, oh, we could get you all kinds of really good stories here.
I'd love that. I really would. I'd find it very, very interesting, but also intriguing as well, really, because there are some gorgeous, gorgeous states in the USA, and they're all full of stories, aren't they? Really?
Right. And so many different kinds, and
Yeah.
including Native American lore, plus
Mm.
people from all over the world settled here. And so we have different aspects from different cultures that all blend into the pot. And you have to remember, nice people didn't come west in the 19th century for the most part if they could help it. People were either escaping or adventurers or looking to make extra money. But most of our famous people out here, um, we're not very nice people. Let's just say, in, in some way or another.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm serious. I don't make an offer of putting somebody in my guest room without meaning it. So
That's
um,
greatly appreciated, William. Greatly appreciated.
yeah, it would be fantastic. And we can stay on and chat for a second, but I think I'll go ahead and end the showpiece. And
Very good. Very
everybody,
good.
thank you so much. And I'll have the links up, um, if not today, tomorrow, so you can watch it again or share it with your friends, everybody. And Simon, thank you.
My pleasure, William. Thank you for kindly inviting me.
Okay, take care.